Mom married a younger guy, wanted him to replace my dad at my wedding, then cut me off. Now she's begging for forgiveness.
Hey there, everyone. I need to share something that's been eating away at me.
A couple of days ago, right after my wedding, I got into a nasty argument with my mom. Honestly, it was her doing, but recently, I had a conversation with my grandma that unintentionally made things even worse for her. That's why I'm here. I need to figure out if what I did was justified or not. I'm 24, a woman, and I've been with my partner, who's also 24, for the past decade.
We started dating back in high school, and he's the absolute love of my life.
Naturally, our wedding was a massive milestone for me. We got engaged last year and spent months meticulously planning the whole event because we wanted it to be something everyone would remember. Both of us worked hard and saved up a good chunk of money to make it all happen, but my mom seemed entirely uninterested in any of that.
A bit of background here: my parents divorced when I was 6.
They'd been married for about 9 years before they called it quits, and honestly, I've always wondered how they managed to stay together as long as they did. Their relationship was a constant battlefield. When they finally split up, most kids my age would have been heartbroken, but I was relieved. At the time, it felt like a ticket to peace. No more daily arguments, no more tension in the air. I thought if they were happier apart, I might finally get a shot at being happy too. Initially, I was okay with their shared custody arrangement, spending half my time at my dad's place and the other half with my mom.
But I quickly realized I'd been naive.
Even though they weren't living together anymore, they still had to communicate about me, and that only led to more fighting. Whenever I was around either of them, they'd badmouth the other, leaving me caught right in the middle.
It was exhausting.
As a kid, I tried to understand their frustrations, but by the time I hit middle school, I'd had enough. One night, when I was staying at my dad's, things boiled over. They'd been arguing again, this time about a schedule change my mom wanted to make because of some event she had coming up. My dad wasn't okay with it, and after hearing him vent about her one too many times, something inside me snapped. That night, I made a decision. 12-year-old me thought the only way out was to run away. I didn't have a plan, not even a vague idea of where I'd go. I just packed a few things in the middle of the night and left. I still remember walking to the bus station and seeing this creepy guy hanging around. It freaked me out, so I turned back and ended up at a park near our house. I figured I'd sleep there and head back to the bus station in the morning.
Looking back, it was one of the dumbest things I've ever done.
Thankfully, nothing bad happened that night. By morning, my dad realized I was gone, called the police, and they found me quickly. When my parents confronted me about what had driven me to such an extreme, I told them the truth, that their constant fighting made me feel like a burden.
That conversation was a wake-up call for them.
They promised to try harder, to be more civil for my sake.
My dad actually followed through on that promise.
Even when he was frustrated with my mom, he never let it show around me again.
My mom, on the other hand, wasn't as consistent.
Every now and then, she'd slip up and go on a rant about my dad in front of me, which made things tough. I loved both my parents, but their inability to get along was draining. I don't think either of them were bad people, they just couldn't make peace with each other, and that made co-parenting a nightmare. Over time, though, I naturally grew closer to my dad. He put in the effort to shield me from the drama, and I appreciated that. I still had good times with my mom when I stayed with her, and I don't think I loved her any less. It's just that the connection with my dad felt stronger. After I left for college, he kept in touch more often than my mom did, which only deepened that bond. Even now, I treat both my parents with respect and try to love them equally, but recent events tested my patience. My mom did something so self-centered that I ended up lashing out at her. After their divorce, both my parents moved on in different ways. My dad remarried 4 years ago to a woman he'd been seeing for 3 years. It was clear they were serious about each other, and I was genuinely happy for him. My mom, on the other hand, took a different approach. She had flings but never committed to anyone. That was her choice, and I respected it. But then, about 6 months ago, she called me out of the blue to announce that she'd been dating someone for a few months and they were getting married. She wanted me to be at the wedding. The whole thing felt rushed and completely out of left field, but she insisted that she was sure about this guy and that he felt the same way about her. See, my mom had her fun for years after the divorce, but now she said she wanted someone by her side for the long haul. Her new husband, Marcus, let's just call him that for now, had only been with her for about 4 months when they decided to tie the knot. They both seemed genuinely smitten with each other, but I couldn't shake off the doubts I had about their relationship. For one, Marcus was almost 10 years younger than her, and for another, they barely knew each other when they got married. My mom kept gushing about how it was Marcus who proposed the idea of marriage, but honestly, the way she went on about it during the wedding only made it feel more off. I tried to bring up my concerns with her, but she waved me off, saying she was absolutely sure about her decision. I didn't push it further because I didn't want to come across as judgmental, and for what it's worth, Marcus did seem pretty into her. So, I went to the wedding, wished them well, and tried my best to be supportive. A few close friends and relatives showed up too, and the whole thing felt like a whirlwind. Later, when I told my dad about it, even he was surprised that she jumped into marriage with someone she barely knew, but by that point, it was a done deal. Afterward, I got so caught up in planning my own wedding that I barely paid attention to what was happening with my mom and Marcus. From what I could tell, they were happy, traveling all the time. In fact, I hardly saw her over the next 6 months, and she even missed my bridal shower.
But honestly, I didn't mind.
The night before my wedding, though, she knocked on my hotel room door, saying she needed to talk to me about something important. Curious, I let her in, and that's when she dropped a bombshell. She said she'd overheard me talking to my dad about him walking me down the aisle and had assumed I would ask Marcus to do it instead. She even thought the rehearsal dinner was proof that I'd changed my mind, but I never did. I had already decided that both my parents would walk me down the aisle, partly to keep things balanced given our family dynamics and partly to make sure my mom didn't feel excluded.
But asking Marcus?
That thought had never even crossed my mind. I'd only known the guy for a few months. To me, Marcus wasn't my stepdad, he was just my mom's husband. I was genuinely baffled that she even expected something like that. I told her, as calmly as I could, that I had no intention of asking Marcus to walk me down the aisle, and if she thought otherwise, she was mistaken. At that point, my mom started throwing a fit. She claimed that if Marcus wasn't included in walking me down the aisle, neither of them would come to the wedding. According to her, she had believed that, because I was closer to her, Marcus naturally should have been part of the ceremony. She also thought it would send the wrong message if she and my dad walked me down the aisle together, and she worried it might make Marcus feel insecure. I didn't have the patience to deal with this, not the night before my wedding.
I needed sleep, not drama.
So, I firmly told her that if she didn't want to attend, she was free to leave with Marcus.
Then I asked her to leave my room, and that was that.
The next morning, she was gone. I explained what had happened to my close family, my husband, and my bridesmaids. Thankfully, the rest of the day was such a whirlwind of activity that I didn't have time to dwell on it, which was a blessing because thinking about her absence might have ruined my mood.
When the time came, my dad and stepmom walked me down the aisle.
I like my stepmom, so it felt natural, and while a few people looked confused, no one said anything. It was clear I wanted the day to be free of drama, and for the most part, it was. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and I couldn't have been happier. Toward the end of the reception, about an hour before the celebrations wrapped up, my mom and Marcus showed up. She looked sheepish, so I immediately knew she was there to apologize. By that time, I'd had a few drinks and was riding the high of just having gotten married, so I was more than ready to let bygones be bygones. When she apologized, I told her I accepted it and invited her to join the rest of the festivities. But instead of mingling, she stayed by my side, only to drop yet another bombshell. She told me she had a favor to ask. She wanted us to redo the wedding ceremony so that she could be part of it. Both my husband and I were absolutely floored by her request.
Asking us to redo the entire wedding ceremony? It was so absurd that we didn't even entertain the idea and immediately declined.
But then she kept pleading, and Marcus looked nervous. That's when he finally chimed in, explaining that my mom was desperate because if they didn't fix this, my grandma might cut her off. To give some context, both of my dad's parents attended the wedding, but my grandma, my mom's only surviving parent, was unable to come. She lives out of state and has a ton of health issues that make traveling impossible. I had promised to send her a video of the wedding, and apparently, while my mom and Marcus were driving back home, my grandma had video called her. That's when my mom realized just how badly she'd messed up.
Now, she was panicking about what my grandma would say if she found out the truth.
According to Marcus, my grandma's opinion carried a lot of weight, and my mom was terrified of disappointing her.
My grandma has always been big on family and strongly values those bonds.
She had only missed the wedding because of her health, but everyone knew she adored me. I'm her only grandchild, and she'd be devastated to learn that my mom had left my wedding over something so petty.
That's why my mom thought redoing the ceremony was a reasonable solution.
The venue was still decorated, most of the guests hadn't left yet, and in her mind, it was the perfect way to sweep the whole mess under the rug before my grandma found out.
But I wasn't having it.
I stood my ground and told her that this was her fault, and I wasn't going to redo my wedding just to cover up her mistake.
That's when things escalated.
She started arguing, insisting that this was the only way to make things right before my grandma found out. She kept saying that my grandma wouldn't forgive her if she knew the truth and that it could jeopardize their relationship.
At that point, I was completely done with her whining.
My grandma kept trying to video call her, and I could see my mom panicking. So, I took matters into my own hands. I called over my maid of honor, grabbed my phone, and before my mom could react, I FaceTimed my grandma myself. The moment my grandma picked up, she was all smiles, thrilled to see me. We chatted briefly about how the wedding went and how happy I was, but then I got straight to the point. I told her everything, how my mom had walked out of the wedding, how she tried to make us redo the ceremony, and how she was trying to trick my grandma into thinking nothing had happened.
And I did it all right in front of my mom.
My mom froze on the spot, completely speechless. When I turned the phone around so my grandma could see her, she still couldn't say a word. My grandma, on the other hand, had plenty to say. She laid into my mom for a solid 6 minutes, calling her out for her selfish behavior and telling her how disappointed she was. It was brutal, but honestly, my mom had it coming.
Then, my grandma delivered the final blow.
She told my mom that she didn't need to bother coming home for the holidays that year and that she didn't want to speak to her until I had forgiven her.
Only then, she said, would she even consider mending things between them. After that, my grandma wished me luck and ended the call.
For a moment, I braced myself, thinking my mom and Marcus were going to explode at me, but they didn't. They just stood there, silent and stunned. A few minutes later, they left without saying another word, and honestly, I was relieved. If they'd thrown a tantrum, it might have ruined the rest of my reception, but thankfully, they didn't.
The rest of the evening went off without a hitch.
My husband and I made it a point not to dwell on my mom's antics and focused on enjoying the night with our guests.
The day after the wedding, once we were back home, my grandma called me again.
She wanted to talk about everything that had happened but had kept it brief during the wedding so I wouldn't miss out on the celebration. Now, she had time to explain things properly. Apparently, my grandma and my mom had already been on shaky ground for months because of my mom's decision to marry Marcus. From the start, my grandma had been against the idea of her rushing into marriage with someone she barely knew, and she hadn't been shy about voicing her concerns.
My mom, naturally, didn't take it well.
They'd had a falling out after the wedding, and it was months before they spoke again. Eventually, my mom apologized to my grandma and visited her with Marcus to make amends. But according to my grandma, Marcus wasn't exactly making things easy. She said she had nothing against him personally and had even been kind and welcoming to him, but he acted aloof and standoffish. It was like he thought he was too good to engage with her, brushing off her attempts to get to know him. Hearing all this didn't exactly surprise me, but it did make me feel a bit better about standing my ground.
Clearly, my mom's behavior wasn't just a one-off, there were deeper issues at play.
My grandma had already started to feel uneasy about Marcus after her first encounter with him. She tried to push past her instincts, but after my mom and Marcus visited her, things got worse.
Marcus' aloof and dismissive attitude didn't sit well with her. She even told my mom how she felt, which only led to more arguments between the two of them. My mom kept bringing up the same tired excuse, how her parents thought my dad was the perfect match for her, but marrying him ended up being the biggest mistake of her life. She claimed that my grandma was refusing to give Marcus a real chance simply because he was new to the family and they hadn't been together long. My grandma didn't buy it.
She explained that her concerns had nothing to do with Marcus as a person.
She would have had the same reservations about any man my mom barely knew before rushing into marriage.
But Marcus had taken her advice personally and, instead of building a bridge, he doubled down on his attitude. This only made things worse between my mom and grandma. By the time my wedding day rolled around, their relationship was already strained. Then came the final straw, my mom skipping my wedding just because I wouldn't let Marcus walk me down the aisle. We still don't know whose idea it was, my mom's or Marcus, but it didn't matter. She had chosen to leave, and worse, she tried to cover it up by convincing me to redo the ceremony just to hide it from my grandma. After my grandma and I talked through everything, we came to a clear realization: my mom had been acting selfishly for months. She had taken both her own mother and her daughter for granted, and we were done letting her get away with it. On that call, my grandma and I made a mutual decision: we weren't going to speak to my mom for the next couple of months, at least not until she apologized sincerely to both of us. To make things clear, my grandma sent my mom a message on our behalf, stating that neither of us wanted to hear from her until we were ready. She hoped my mom would respect this boundary, but of course, she didn't. Instead, my mom decided to lash out at me. She sent a series of bitter messages, blaming me for everything. According to her, it was my fault that even her own mother wasn't speaking to her anymore. She insisted that I'd made things worse on purpose, saying that I could have just declined her request to redo the wedding, which I did, several times, but she claimed I'd taken it too far by involving my grandma. She accused me of deliberately turning my grandma against her, saying I was recruiting people to gang up on her. She thought it was unfair for me to drag my grandma into the situation and escalate things. Honestly, I think she's just being whiny and deflecting blame again. But it did make me pause for a moment. Maybe she has a point? Was I wrong to tell my grandma everything? Update 1. Thank you to everyone who left supportive comments on my post. After thinking it over, I've decided to block my mom and put an end to this drama. I don't need to entertain her negativity anymore. Her behavior has been erratic ever since she got involved with Marcus, and I've come to the conclusion that I don't need this stress in my life, especially not as a newlywed. My husband and I deserve to enjoy this chapter without worrying about what my mom thinks or feels. By the end of next week, we won't even be here. We're heading to Paris for our honeymoon. Yes, it's kind of a cliché, but I'm so excited to sightsee and create beautiful memories with my husband. I want to start this new chapter of my life free of any negativity, and the best way to ensure that is by cutting off contact with my mom, at least for now. My entire life, I've tried to show my mom love and respect, just as I've done for my dad, to make sure she never felt left out. But now, I don't feel that same sense of obligation anymore. She made her choices, and I'm making mine. Looking back, I realized that my dad has always treated me better than my mom ever did. I used to feel like I needed to treat them equally, but now I think that would actually be unfair. My dad has consistently shown up for me, while my mom has let me down more times than I can count. After my mom's recent behavior, I talked everything through with my grandma, my dad, and my husband. They all agreed that blocking her was the right decision, and honestly, they felt I should have done it sooner, maybe even on my wedding day. I didn't though, because it was hard to let go of the hope that I could have a good relationship with my mom. But now, I've come to terms with the fact that I can't let her treat me poorly and just keep excusing it. Update 2. Hey, everyone. My husband and I are leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow, and I guess I must have mentioned it to my mom at some point because she somehow remembered. Here's the thing, I blocked her everywhere, so she had no way to reach me. But she managed to find a loophole by emailing me at my work address. I hadn't blocked her there because I didn't think she'd ever use it to contact me. At first, I thought about just deleting the email. But curiosity got the better of me, and I ended up opening it with my husband by my side. By the time we finished reading it, we both felt weird. In the email, my mom wrote about how much she loved me and how sorry she was for treating me badly. She explained that the whole situation with Marcus walking me down the aisle wasn't even her idea, it was his. Apparently, even when they got married, she had tried to delay the wedding so they could take more time to get to know each other, but Marcus talked her out of it. The night before my wedding, Marcus manipulated her into thinking it would look bad if my dad walked me down the aisle instead of him. She admitted that she had defended him because she loved him, but now she realized how wrong she was. She said she felt stuck between Marcus and her family, and for the first time, she understood how I must have felt as a child of divorce. She also mentioned that Marcus could be controlling, though she usually brushed it off. However, after they talked recently, he supposedly admitted he needed to work on that, and she promised to stand up for herself more in the future. The email ended with her saying she hoped we could reconnect after my honeymoon and wishing me a wonderful trip. Here's the thing, I'm not convinced. The way she described Marcus made him sound manipulative, and it felt like she was trying to sugarcoat the situation. My husband and I talked it over, and we decided we can't deal with this right now. We're leaving tomorrow, and I don't want this weighing on me while I'm trying to enjoy my honeymoon. To make sure she's okay, though, I told my dad about everything. Despite how much he dislikes her, he's a decent man, and I know he wouldn't let anything bad happen to her. I also told one of her close friends about the situation. They've been friends since childhood, so I trust that she'll check in on my mom while I'm away. Update 3. Hey again. This will be a shorter update. My husband and I went on our honeymoon as planned and had an amazing time. When we got back, I sent my mom an email letting her know I'd be open to talking, but I never got a response. I checked in with her friends, who said she seemed happy, so I assumed everything was fine and got busy with life. Fast forward to 2 weeks ago, and I finally heard back from my mom. She thanked me for reaching out to her friend and telling her about my doubts regarding Marcus. Apparently, I was right, Marcus wasn't the right guy for her. She told me he'd been trying to isolate her from everyone, even asking her to cut ties with her childhood friend because he found her problematic and nosy. Her friend, thankfully, caught on. After my mom canceled plans 4 times in a row, her friend confronted her. My mom broke down and admitted everything. Marcus had been treating her poorly, and she couldn't take it anymore. With her friend's support, my mom filed for divorce. Since she had moved in with Marcus after getting married and given up her apartment, she's been living with her friend while she figures things out. Hearing all of this shocked me, but I'm so grateful she's getting out of that situation. She reached out to thank me for looking out for her by telling her friend what was going on. She said that without that email and the push her friend gave her, she might not have had the courage to leave. Now, my grandma, dad, and I are all trying to be there for her. We're hoping this is the start of something better for all of us.